Hello, hello. Let me fix this. Good. Good. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be taking part of the Global Azure event. It's now my fifth year. Um, I had the pleasure to participate on the Madrid one for 2 years. Then I organized the London one the last 2 years. And now, to the situation, we have to present live via streaming on my son's bedroom. So um, yeah, let's see how this goes. So my name is David Nodeman. Um, I am a seven-time Microsoft MVP, and now I just started working for Microsoft. It's been 3 weeks, so I'm glad that I can still present in events like that. And I'll be presenting three different sessions at this event. So today we'll be talking about Windows Virtual Desktop. I'm not going to claim I'm one of the world leading experts on this topic because it's a quite new product. And to be fair, I've been exploring, I would say about 1 or 2 hours per day, this product for the last 2 weeks. So, I know enough to talk about it and, let you know what it is, but not much more than that. Okay, everything is mirrored, no problem. Thanks for letting me know. I can fix that quickly. Great. Does that work now? Let me know. Who's that? Mr. Charles Morin, thank you very much for letting me know everything was flipped. Um, I was aware that it could potentially happen with the software I'm using, but yeah, thanks for letting me know. Now we should be all good, up and running. Yeah, so I'll be presenting three sessions today about virtual desktop. Then I'll be talking about keeping your data safe in a chaotic world. We're going to talk about, now that we have different work styles and lots of different devices, how do we keep our data, especially the more confidential and critical one, safe in yeah in any environment. And then I'll be talking about how to simplify single sign-on to a lot of the software as a service um, applications using Azure Active Directory. Let's crack on. Let's go to the exciting bit. Virtualization always helped address lots of different business needs. So there was the security and regulation. So highly regulated environments where data security is a big concern. Um, like financial services, government, and military environments. Virtualization, giving a virtual desktop to someone would potentially address data leakage and accessing specific resources. Elastic workforce was always one, and nowadays, even more, right? Getting suddenly everyone working from home is an interesting one, and a lot of companies were prepared for it. But also includes, you're merging a company and you can quickly provision virtual desktops so people can, or sessions, so people can work while still using their old devices. Um, you know, and then there was always the, branch workers, call centers, bring your own device and mobile. Virtualization was always a big uh, player there. I participated, I would say, about 3 years ago in a project for a big bank. It was called the A3 project. A3 because it was any application, any device, anywhere. So it's basically a virtualized platform where they had virtual applications and desktops where people could effectively work from an iPad or any dumb device. Um, and then specialized workforces. Braintree is an interesting one. There's a lot of companies who still use remote desktop. So what they have, instead of having VPNs and complex systems, they put everything on a remote desktop server, and each of the sites uses a session on the server, and they run all the applications from there. So the setup on the branch office is quite simple. All they need is a computer and a stable internet connection. That's all. So quite interesting. And virtualization was always good, always delivered value. But there was always scenarios that were missing, right? So virtualization hosts today, they scalable. So Windows Server, they have a desktop experience, but it's that uh, it has some issues. It's multiple sessions in one server. The license of Office is always the perpetual one because of the way servers are designed. Yeah, and you're running on a server environment. And then you had the pure VDI, where you're running Windows 10. So each machine has one, user at a time, even if you have a pool. If you connect a second user by accident or on purpose to the same machine, you'll disconnect the first one. Um, and so it's single session, and then you have the advantages of using Office, and the semi-annual channel version of Windows. Same you would get on a normal physical desktop. Um, what we're talking about today is, the introduction of a Windows 10 multi-session, right? Which is quite interesting. So you can have one version of Windows and have multiple users connecting to it at the same time. Advantages, well, interesting, right? So one of the challenges with VDI was you need heavy application and user profile management. These will have some um, advantages. So if you install a application on that, all the users using that machine can use it. And if you use a managed image, then everyone can use it. We'll talk about the different options for images that you can use. So the benefits, enables multi-session, and it's been heavily optimized for Office 365 Pro Plus. I believe there's a slide that I set aside explaining specifically the improvements for Office 365. It's a very um, flexible platform. So one thing that we have to be very clear that people don't stress enough, right? There's two different things we're talking about here. One is the addition of Windows 10 multi-session, right? Which is wonderful. I believe it's great. And the key benefit for me is there were a lot of applications were not really compatible to run on a server, or because of restrictions on the server or legacy components, it runs better on a VDI. Now you can have a hybrid, right? A remote desktop server that's running on Windows 10. But Windows Virtual Desktop is actually a service where you can run uh, RDS as well, the traditional server one. You can run individual Windows 10 uh, VDIs. You don't need to run the multi-session. And depending on your licenses, you get to run Windows 7 as well with extended support and security updates, which is quite interesting. But be aware that there is no multi-session for Windows 7. So they didn't go back and re-engineer Windows 7 from scratch. They're just making it available as a VDI platform to run Windows 7. The only advantage is that, as far as I'm aware, that's the only supported Windows 7 platform license that you can, license that you can buy. So yeah, so supported OSs, Windows 10 multi-session, single session, Windows 7 single session, and different flavors of Windows Server. So you can run RDS with that as well, the traditional one. Um, there's a few repetition, right? But I think the key message on this slide is it's hosted by Azure. All the resources are there. You bring in the license and you bring in some management skills of the platform. That's all. Everything else is being run and provided by Microsoft. We'll talk about integration with on-prem, which is important. Um, but I think the key message, as with most cloud products, it is ability to deploy and scale in literally minutes, right? So the high-level architecture, it utilizes Azure Active Directory as identity management service. You can integrate with your on-prem AD. If you don't, you need to do something we're going to cover. Um, and it's effectively a virtualization infrastructure, right? So you can deploy machines that are within your Azure subscription, and you can manage those machines by using SCCM, for example, Intune, or any other management platform you'd like to use. Yeah, and it's quite simple to connect to on-premise resources, right? The same way you manage any other Azure um, service, right? So what you have is all the compute, storage, networking provided by Microsoft. Microsoft manages, the web access, diagnosis, the broker, load balancing, gateway. So all the RDS components are on the top, and that's also managed by Microsoft. So you don't see the RDS elements at all, at least for now. I don't know how much flexibility you have on that. And then your subscription, you control, what's on remote app and which server or OS you will be using. Uh, so prerequisites, and that's quite an interesting one. It's very important that you go through the prerequisites, otherwise you're wasting time if you try to deploy the template for the marketplace straight away. I wasted a lot of time. Next time I should have done, read the documentation first, but especially the prerequisites. But it's quite well documented, step by step. You don't need to understand what the PowerShell scripts do if you don't want to. Just run them in the order of the documentation, and you'll be up and running. There's only one small trick that I'll mention afterwards because, yeah, I'll explain what happened to me. But basically, the prerequisites will take you to different scripts. So the first one is to grant Azure AD the consent to use the virtual desktop application and grants the right permissions for that application on the Azure AD. The second one, you're assigning the tenant creator role to the Azure AD component, and then you can use PowerShell to create a tenant or the marketplace template, which the one will be covering in a few minutes. So recommendations on identity, right? So that's the one I used because we decided not to have any servers on-prem. We use Azure AD as our main identity directory, and then what we did was to spin up an Azure AD domain services inside our Azure tenant. The reason why you need Azure domain services is machines must be domain joined, right? They say allow VMs to be domain joined, but they are domain joined, right? At least the multi-session must be. I don't know if the other ones is a must, but at least the multi-session one is. But if you want to run on-prem, it's a similar scenario, but instead of using Azure AD directory services, you're actually using a site-to-site VPN with your Azure tenant, and then you can synchronize identities. Uh, just make sure that your VPN is stable and the latency is low, so everything can run smoothly. And I think one of the biggest uh, news and acquisitions by Microsoft in recent years for people who love RDS, like I do, and VDI, is they acquired FS Logics, and it's part of um, some of the licenses uh, that allows you to use Windows virtual desktops. We'll cover the required licensing, but it offers massive improvements on profile management. Right, it was a big missing piece for Microsoft. That's why they acquired, and that's why they promote it on every slide deck and presentation when they talk about um, Windows virtual desktops. So it's quite good on device redirection. I'll show you how it actually works. But as far as printing and using, audio and cameras, it's quite seamless. So, um, and yeah, I think this is one of the coolest things uh, from my point of view. Is this is the kind of technology that enables things like Samsung DeX to work the way it was designed. I don't know if you're all familiar with Samsung DeX, but the most recent Samsung devices, you can connect your phone or tablet to a USB-C monitor, and you effectively have a full screen desktop uh, that you can run, for example, an RDP client and connect to uh, an RDS server or to Windows Virtual Desktop. So it's a quite interesting way. And you could, because it's a USB-C monitor, you could potentially plug in a keyboard and mouse um, on it, or you can connect the keyboard and mouse on the um, on the phone via Bluetooth as well. So it's interesting times what you can do nowadays, but I think that was always the future, where you have a powerful machine in your hand and you could plug into any computer and you get a mouse and keyboard, and then your phone has enough processing power to run those virtual sessions running somewhere else. You don't need to give people a laptop. And it's interesting because a lot of people say, no, I don't want to give everyone a laptop because a laptop is quite expensive. But a mobile phone is a lot more expensive, and companies kind of throw it away like it's something. Uh, yeah, interesting discussion. Um, so don't know what the next one is. Ah, yeah. So who's eligible? Um, so for a client, you need a Microsoft E3 or E5 license. Some other licenses included as well, like Microsoft 365 Business. Just a quick reminder that a lot of the Office 365 uh, licenses were renamed, so now everything is called Microsoft 365. I'm just not sure if this was translated with the new names or not, but check the availability. But basically, if you don't have Microsoft 365, you need a Windows 10 VDA um, license per user, like I always did with VDI. And for servers, you need RDS cows with software assurance to be able to use it online. Yeah, and for FS Logics, it's a similar licensing landscape. Oh, no, thank you yet. We're not done. We're done with the boring PowerPoint bit. So now let's go with the exciting Azure demos bits. How do I hide this? Cool. So first thing we need to do is to go to our Azure subscription. And of course, when you're doing live demos, the internet's slow, it drops, and all sorts of things will happen. So the way you would set up uh, Windows Virtual Desktop is Windows Virtual Desktops, right? You would provision a host pool in here using the marketplace template, right? That's by far the easiest way. Otherwise, you can just do some research and do everything on PowerShell one by one, or you can run this and get the PowerShell commands at the end, right? So if you create a new host pool, I'll use a demo environment. I'll call it pool 02. I will add a user to user, and then are the names correct? Yes. So I'm adding two users to the pool as default users. And the metadata for the moment. Okay, which email address is not correct? Okay, let's leave the first one. Okay. Yeah, so the metadata is only available at the moment at the US, right? I believe they will be changing that very quickly. But that's just the service metadata, it's not the actual resources. The resources you choose here where the instance will be running. So this is a very interesting bit, right? So you can choose to create an availability set, right? So you know how many virtual machines are available for scaling. In this case, I'm not going to do it because I don't have a lot of credit on my Azure subscription. Let's say light because it's just a demo. I'll get an environment that can run up to 10 users. So it's recommending to use one machine with 16 gig of RAM and 4 vCPUs. You can always click here and change the size of the machine, and you can also have an idea, the approximate monthly cost of that machine. So in this case, again, for demo purposes only, I'll get a B2S. And the machine names for this demo will start with poo02 as a prefix. So by default, you get given the option to use images from the gallery. So those are pre-made images that you can use. So there's Windows 10 multi-session with Office, Windows 10 multi-session, so without Office, Windows 10 Enterprise, and Windows Server. Right? You could upload a managed image if you had one, or you can use blob storage to add your own image if you want to. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one with multi-session, with standard SSD. Then here I need to add a user with permissions to add the machine to the domain. And the password. specify or not domain, it doesn't matter, but we'll join it anyway. But I'll specify. Let's be a bit lazy. You could specify a specific OU if you want for those machines to be joined to. And that's the interesting bit. Make sure you choose uh, a virtual network and a subnet where you have access to Active Directory, right, to the domain controller. Otherwise, it will not work, right? So I'll show you what I had to do. So I had to create one on my Azure subscription because I didn't have a physical domain controller. So I created a Azure domain controller, Azure domain service, Azure Active Directory domain service instance. And an important tip is if you're doing that for test purposes, make sure you go through the setup of it until the end. One of the options is to publish the domain controller to DNS. If you don't do that, the service will not find the domain controller, right? So even though it's on the same subnet, and there is by default a Microsoft managed automatic DNS server, when you provision the domain services, the Azure AD domain services, you need to click on that, add to DNS in order for it to work, right? So here we can, create a tenant group. I'll just call it tenant group. The tenant's name will be called, I don't know, 2 again. And then have two options to set up the owner of the RDS tenant. You can use a UPN, which is your Azure admin account, or you can use a service principal if you configure, application ID and things like that before. I'm uploading a video on my blog later this week, tomorrow possibly, which is Friday, explaining how to do this bit. Right? It's quite interesting if you're going to provision multiple machines. But I'll just use my username. Good. So this will do a quick check if all the information we included has been validated. And when I click create, it will submit the deployment and we'll start provisioning the pool, right? To make things easier, of course, I don't know how long this will take. Last time it took about 15 minutes. I don't want to make you wait 15 minutes, but I wanted to make sure we cover this. I'll go straight to one that's working. So let me get the URL. All right, so you can have one URL for all your different users and different deployments. That's a Azure generic one, right? RD Web. So because I meant, so one of the things I mentioned is it's basically a managed RDS server, right? So that's the generic RDS address, and based on your credentials. So it took, my credentials by default. I have a pool provision to this user here, right? So it's pretty much a RD web with the HTML5 component enabled. So for example, if I click on pool 1, I can redirect resources, printer, and clipboard. Allow. It will connect to a machine on that pool. I'll do some investigation on single sign-on to see if it's able to bypass this second authentication. Almost there. Okay, good. So here we have a running on a browser, a full-blown multi-session Windows desktop, right? Of course, you can maximize it and make sure this thing goes away. So you get a full experience, and it always readjusts to the full length and width of the screen, so you can always, use it. And it's a pretty standard. It's a Windows 10 image. The only difference is multi-session. All the Office applications were installed by default. I installed Edge and Chrome so we can run the next little demo that I'll be presenting. So you notice that when I joined, my list of resources were limited, right? The resources I get is one machine on the pool. What we can do for different users, so I'll start a new window here. I will access the gateway with a different user. Let's see if there's any questions. Okay, good. So click. Okay, so on the same deployment, I'm logging in with a different user. And so I did not specify this user on the resource group for the machine, but I did create a remote app group and publish to this user, right? So for now, we have Excel. So if I click here, I'll connect and get, Excel with, the size of the screen I decide to do. Because this is running on a browser, you get whatever size the browser gets, right? And I'll share on the description of the video once it's recorded and on my blog, which is endpointmanagers.com. Those scripts here, they're quite interesting, right? So in here I have pool 1, which is the one I created. I published Excel. So on the blog, I'll explain each one of those, but those are to import the module to manage RDS. That's the deployment URL, tenant, name of the pool, and now here we're going to application group, right? So I'm creating an application group called Office, and the resource type for Office is a remote app, right? So I already created one with Excel, but then what I'll do is I'll run this, and this will give me a list of all the applications that can be published as a remote app that are installed on the machine, right? So let's see if I can find Google Chrome. Chrome, here it is. And what I need is the app alias, right? Which is Google Chrome in one go. So instead of Excel here, I'll use Google Chrome and add it to the pool. Select this line, run this, and I want it to be called Google Chrome. Done. So this application is now being published as a remote app. I don't know how long it takes, but let's get another one. WordPad. WordPad is always cool. WordPad is awesome. Oh, I guess it didn't like the exclamation mark. WordPad is awesome. Good. So I don't know how long it takes for it to really take effect, but let's see if I refresh. If I get, oh, good, good, good. So I get Google Chrome and WordPad. Right. So if I click on Google Chrome, for example, I'll ask about access to local resources. Any questions? How about the Edge browser? I'll see if it's on the list. It should be. Um, so I'm a bit lazy. Can anyone type on the chat what the Edge executable file is? Is it edge.exe, or if someone can do the research while I look at this, then it will be an interactive session. Right? That's the advantage of a live session with a chat, is that we can interact. So click. Okay. Um, yeah, it's pretty similar to I call it, anything that Microsoft does that remotely resembles Citrix. I call it, the best Microsoft can do without upsetting Citrix. The cool thing is, because this is an RDS server that's managed online. Don't know what happened with this. It was going full screen and stopped.